Well, now it's the Keykeeper's video making turn. I'm actually running the camera on his behalf. And as you can see here, we have a very appropriate label on this truck. I think that's very fitting. So, Keykeeper, what are you getting ready to do to this thing?
My truck is caught.
Well, I would too. So tell us what you're getting ready to do to this thing.
Sway bar links.
Sway bar links. You doing 1, 2, 10?
I'm doing the front end, so 2.
Doing 2 of them, okay.
You see that? I was jacking the truck up the other day to let the water drain out of the bed.
Yes.
And I realized that the driver's side sway bar bolt was broken.
That's not good.
Alright, so I ordered the parts from the local automotive house, and surprisingly enough, they're made in this country for $7. So I've got the parts in my toolbox, and I'm going to see what it involves to change them out tonight.
Okay, sounds good. He's getting ready to coat things with a pretty liberal dousing of WD-40 in the hopes that it'll make them easier to remove. You can see sitting in that oil change pan is all the crap that was left over from my brake job, including the old pads.
What's going on is I'm doing my sway bar end links. I broke one off just now. You can see how rusty they are.
Yep.
This is a bushing, you can see that, the rust inside of it. And now, since both end links are broken off, I can actually take my sway bar and physically move it.
Yep, you sure can.
So, this is a pretty simple job, but since this is the original sway bar hardware on this truck, it's all rusted together, so I'm going to have to decide how I want to go about removing the old crap so I can get the new stuff put in place.
Okay. Listen to how awful and dry that sounds.
By removing the sway bar, that's the easiest way that I can get that old stuff off.
And when you get the sway bar down off of there, tell us about what you're going to do.
Okay.
You're going to take a grinder.
I'll take my angle grinder, and it's got a grinding disc in it, and I'll simply just cut the bolt heads off at the very top of the sway bar, so I can take like a punch and my hammer and knock out the old hardware. And then install the new hardware.
I love that when the head of the bolt gets stuck in the ratchet.
Well,
good times.
I should replace the bolts. Look at those threads.
Those bolts have seen better days, and that one actually looks kind of bent. Maybe doing a lot of front end work on this thing. What were some of the other problems you noticed?
I noticed that one of the inner tie rods might have a burst boot.
Yep.
You want to play that game?
The logo up on the grill was definitely correct. Alright. If you ever can't get a fastener's head to come out of your socket, you can just screw it back in from whence it came, and then you've got a little more leverage to work with.
I've got 2 bolts out. There's 4 total. So I'm taking the last one out here, and when I do, the sway bar will drop. So I'll get my head out of the way so I don't get a surprise. And then I'll go to the other side and drop that bolt. And it might be a good idea to wear gloves when you're doing this so you don't get a blister, not a rash. Remember, eye protection.
Oh yes, absolutely. It's never worth taking a chance on your vision.
Classic.
Did it again, huh? Well, there you can see the sway bar has come down. Now without this thing here...
Bracket.
Yep, there's the bracket.
And here's my...
rubber boot, which is amazingly still good.
16 or 17-year-old rubber boot.
I'm amazed that's not all crackled and rotten.
Yeah.
Now with this off of here, the Keykeeper is going to have to do something he's not very practiced at. That's driving more carefully and deliberately. because now the truck won't be quite as sure-footed as it has been in hard cornering and things like that. Not that there's probably a huge risk of pitching it into a roll, but there's certainly some. General Motors did put that there for a reason.
If you're wondering what size these are, I'm using a 10mm deep socket, so they're a metric bolt.
There goes. All those cruddy rubber bushings and everything.
I'll dress that with my wire brush to knock down all the high spots of rust and get any other debris off there so the bushings will sit kind of semi-squarely on the metal. That is what was left of my tie rod. My sway bar bushing kit. And after I finished grinding it and then took in an extension and just hammered it down through the sway bar.
Just drove it right out of the sway bar then.
So you can see how bad it was.
Now hold it down closer to the light. There we go. And you can see it's in pretty sad shape.
And if my camera had smell-o-vision, you'd be smelling that burnt rubber, which is stanky.
Be grateful for small miracles. That's a whole nother kind of bad smell right there.
Huh?
You.
Yeah, it smells.
Stinky time again. One of those rubber bushings went off into Never Never Land.
Okay, go up, fan on.
Much to both of our amazement, here's the new bushing kit. And much to our amazement, these parts were actually made in the US. And no, it doesn't say of domestic and imported parts. Should be possible to flip them right around, and of course this is not intended to be a how-to video. So if you're looking for that, you need to look elsewhere. This may be one of those jobs where like 10 hands come in real handy or something. He's putting the rubber hanger back on now, followed by the strap that supports it. And then he'll go over and do that on the other side. We'll mount the bar back in place and set up the linkage to the rest of the suspension. And of course this time around he's also going to throw some anti-seize compound on the threads of those bolts, because really, to be quite frank about it, we probably got rather lucky that they actually came undone, because they've been riding down there in the road and everything else since 1994 without any reprieve.
Kind of funny, even the bushings say that they're made in this country.
That's pretty amazing, really.
And for those of you who don't know what country I'm talking about,
we're in the United States.
Okay, there's my hole. Okay. Let's see, bushing. This is where things get tricky. Okay, What's going on now is the spring here, there's not enough, the bolt's not long enough for me to get threads caught on the nut. So I'm gonna have to take my jack that up so where those threads coming through, that will catch the nut so I can tighten this all up. Because right now, the bolt's going halfway through this bushing and stopping. So I gotta fix that. Well, it's having the opposite effect that I wanted. It's lifting the whole silly truck. Let's see if I can't find something for that wheel to sit on so it will do its job like it's supposed to.
This certainly ought to be interesting if pieces don't go flying everywhere.
Yeah. Whoa. Let's see what we got. Oh. Light me.
Yep, light.
Thank you.
Okay. See if we've got enough threads to work with now.
Oh, we might.
Now, the Keykeeper needed to get a little more suspension travel out of the truck to try and get his tap to go on the bolt and the bushing. So my fat butt is up here sitting on the hood of the pickup truck to introduce more suspension travel.
Why don't you see if you can't flex it or something? I need more weight.
Alright, well, we weren't having any luck with getting the nut on the bottom of the sway bar bushing set to actually tighten on the side where we've got the wheel jacked up right now. There just wasn't enough ability for us to compress that bushing or get the sway bar to go down and therefore apply pressure on that shaft in a downward direction to compress the bushings so that we could get the nut in place. Well, I got to thinking about this because the Keykeeper was kind of stumped, and the idea that I came up with, it didn't matter if I was sitting on this part of the truck or not or anything along those lines. We just couldn't get the suspension to compress enough and the sway bar to go down enough. But here's what I'm thinking, and bear with me because I'm not an engineer and I don't know the right terms and I don't know that I fully understand the physics of what's going on here, but I'll explain what we did and how it ended up working. I went ahead and I sat on this side of the truck where we've got the suspension compressed and I provided additional downforce, and then the Keykeeper went over here to the other side of the sway bar because you see the sway bar is trying to compensate by making both sides of the truck's suspension in the front do the same thing. So he went over to this side, which is basically floating right now on the jack stand, and he was able to start the nut there. Now, if we're as clever as we think we are, and we'd certainly like to think we were that clever, we're going to reverse the scheme. We're going to jack that wheel up and boost it up and have me sit on that side of the hood while this wheel stays on the jack stand. And then, in theory at least, we're hoping that that will allow the sway bar to adjust itself enough that the Keykeeper can start the nut. So that's the theory at hand here that we're working with, and so far it seems to have worked well for at least half the job. So we'll see if it's up to helping us finish the other half. So here's the setup. You can see the sway bar up there, and then you can see the bushing and the metal link. You can see the nut up at the top. You can see the head of the bolt up there, actually. And then you can see the challenge down here. Someplace, there it is, right there. You can see the tap that has to go on the bolt. And ordinarily, you can't compress those bushings enough to get the job done. But with my sitting over on one side of the truck and having it jacked up, we were able to get the bushings to compress enough to get things cooking. So now we're going to reverse that setup and try again. So there you have a better idea, a visual demonstration in case my terminology is unclear as to exactly what we did and how it ended up making things work for us. Now the second one is done. It was a little more involved than the first because the sitting upon it trick did not quite work as we'd hoped it would. But in the end I was able to pull down on the sway bar while the Keykeeper simply put the nut onto the threads, which were finally exposed enough for him to be able to do that. So by hook or by crook, probably, but we got it. And that is certainly a good thing, because it's now just a little bit after 2:30 in the morning.